Hello, everybody. I am so glad you've taken the time to stop and watch this video. I have so much to share with you today, and I tell you, I hope that you are just as inspired and encouraged to make a few of the projects that I will mention in a little while. Mainly, this Christmas tree. Let me tell you how this Christmas tree came about. I'd actually seen the pictures in magazines for a while, and it had been on my to-do list for years. So I'm so glad in this holiday season I took the time to do something for me. Yes, I have quilts in my house, Christmas quilts finally as well. Normally, as quilters, we're so giving. Most of the, I'd say, first 6 or so Christmas quilts I made have gone out to other homes to be loved in. Actually, I visit many of those homes, so I get to love on them when I'm there too. And I do want to continue that tradition of making a quilt every year that gets into a home where I know I'll get to experience it again. That is the reason why I love this sunflower quilt pattern. This is actually the pattern I've used repeatedly because it's so easy to resize it, whether I want it to be a 4x4 or 5x5 or 6x6 layout. No matter how I change up the colorways in the layout, the quilt always looks new and I'd say different enough that everyone thinks that they're receiving something truly unique. But as a maker, I know that it's the same pattern. I know those garment sewers out there understand exactly what I'm saying. So, since I've made this pattern so many times, it creates scraps from the flip and stitch method that is used to make the corner triangle. That flip and stitch method produces a triangle that's a little bit bigger than 3.5-inch square. So, me being me, and as if you've seen any of my other scrap videos, you'll know that I like to save my scraps and I keep them organized in any number of ways. This is a pack of scraps left over from when I've made this quilt, and I keep everything in there together. As I'll mention above, when we go upstairs in a little bit, I love to keep everything organized because if it's organized, I'm more likely to pull it out and produce something quickly. Also, when things are organized, that investment in time pays true dividends in beautiful quilts, because if everything in this packet already went together well in a quilt, then they will go together very well in any other project. So, I'll prove it to you upstairs in a bit. But needless to say, this is a wonderful way to create your own kits out of your scraps. And like I said, I'm going to prove it to you when we get upstairs, when I open this up a little bit more. But as you can see here, I was able just to sit and sew mindlessly using the inspiration that I saw in the magazines, and I used what I had, which was absolutely fantastic. I already buy enough fabric for projects I haven't even thought about, or projects that are potentially going to be done by me. But this is one of those times when I'm truly happy. I used what I had and I got a free project done out of my scraps. What a wonderfulness is awaiting you to finish it or even start it or plan it in your scraps. What can you do? Your scraps may have holiday themes, they may have a modern theme, they may have some sort of vintage theme, or maybe even Civil War. If they do, if your scraps do have that kind of natural flow, well, those themes will make beautiful quilts or projects when you just give them a little bit of time to be put together in your own personal kits. So, the other thing I will say before we go upstairs is when something is together like this already, with a project in mind as well, project or two, it can be a few projects, because certainly I can make quite a few projects out of what's in here. You're ready to gift this away too, because you might be tired of seeing this fabric. You may not want to work with it anymore, and that's okay. Free it up. Free up the space in your sewing studio. Give it to someone else. Let them enjoy it. And I promise you, that's one of the things I love doing. When I'm here sewing with individuals from my bees and whatnot, different exchanges I've been in, if I see that someone likes something, I'm like, go ahead and take it. Because if you can get to it before I can, that's a beautiful thing. Anyway, before we go upstairs, I just want to make sure you notice that Tenderly Stitched is right here. There's so many things that I've been working on this year. I hope all of you have had quite an accomplished year yourselves, and the goals that you have set for yourselves, that you've achieved as many of them as possible. I have achieved more than I expected this year, and I've put a lot of planning into some things for 2023. Actually, let me correct that. One We Serve has definitely helped me with resources and planning, such that I can deliver some wonderful things in 2023. Definitely couldn't do it by my own effort, that's for sure. So, look out for some of the new things that Tenderly Stitch will be doing in 2023. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss finding out about those things. All right, so let's break for a moment and get upstairs. Well, we have made it upstairs together. This is one of my sewing nooks upstairs. I love it because my featherweight is here. I will take a public service announcement break slightly, because just want to let you know that if you have the opportunity to get a vintage sewing machine at a good price, it looks visually good, meaning the enamel looks fairly well intact, there's very little rust, and the needle goes up and down. So use the hand crank to make sure that that needle goes up and down. You get that. Buy it. I have not maybe spent more than $250 on a vintage machine. And matter of fact, on average, this is the only one I spent $250 for. On average, I spent about $50. They still sew like a dream. So please do preserve a piece of history if you have the opportunity to. And certainly, if you come across a featherweight, shucks, let someone know, even if you don't want it, because those things are a high commodity. Anyway, that's enough with the public service announcement. Back to the video, which is about scraps. So I told you when I came upstairs that I would unveil that package of scraps to show you what I did, how I maintained them, so that I was ready to sew that Scrappy Christmas tree that we saw downstairs. Hope you really liked it. Obviously you did, because you're still following this video, right? So one of the things I like to do, whether it's in a decorative box or if it's in some sort of overall container that's used to store big things, I put everything that has to do with the same theme together. So this bag right here has all of my scrap fabric for Christmas, and that way I know that when I come in here, there's several projects that I've probably been thinking about making, planned on making, maybe when you want to test out a pattern or two on scrap fabric versus an actual collection, because believe it or not, I have tubs of Christmas fabric. Christmas is my favorite holiday. So, and as I mentioned downstairs, my intent is always to make a new Christmas quilt every year and give it out, and that way over the decades or so, everyone I know and love will have one. I tell you, one of my quilts is going to definitely make it into the next millennium. I don't know how, but it will. So, with all of that said, the packaging that we were looking at downstairs was this one, but I'm actually going to bring these two out to show you something very special. So, this is my bag of half square triangle scraps. Like I mentioned downstairs, these half square triangles are left over from Flip and Stitch Method out of that quilt pattern. But you might have leftover half square triangles from any pattern that you use commonly. And I would stress that any Flip and Stitch Method pattern, or excuse me, let me rephrase that. Any pattern you use that uses flip and stitch technique, and you have those pieces of triangles left over, save them and save them together by size, and that way you can make a scrap quilt very easily by using all of those triangles that are of the same size, right? So you already have your fabric pressed, starched, and ready to sew, and they're all the same size, so they'll go together easily, and then you can square up those half square triangles quite quickly afterwards. So let's see what I have in here. Looks like I have a set of half square triangles that have already been pressed. I'm sorry, yes, definitely pressed, but stitched and squared up. So, okay, got some done. Looks like I have some that have been pressed open as well. And as you can see, I have a variety of reds, blacks, and beiges. So in that Christmas quilt, the beiges were used on the edges of the tree. The blacks and the reds were used throughout the middle of the tree to give interest in the tree, right? And maybe all of yours are, you might have some blue half square triangles with green against them. You might have some yellow, you might have some gold, whatever the case may be. Have at it, use it, make your tree as interesting as possible. Looks like as well, I have some that have not been pressed open yet, and I can tell from looking at the back, I have some reds, some beiges, some more reds, and some more beiges. So, and I'm sure there's some blacks in here somewhere. So I have more that are ready to be pressed open and squared up. All right, so that's good. Oh, and it looks like I have a pattern in here as well. It looks like there was something else I wanted to make. Oh, I'm a member of the Houston Modern Quilt Guild, and they did a block in a month. This was the pattern, and I was unfortunately didn't have time to do it with everybody, but I knew I had half square triangles already available. So I was like, they're definitely going to be used in this pattern. And as we can see by the quantity I have here, I have more than enough, even after making my Christmas tree downstairs. So, hey, this is definitely going on the list. All right, let me put this pattern this way so I definitely can still see it and know that that's what I wanted to do with all of these. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you the secondary pattern is, now if memory serves me right, the quilt pattern had 4.5-inch squares. You heard me say that I trimmed down my half square triangles to 3.5-inch very easily. So that means I have some 4 patches that are a little bit bigger, or I can square these squares down to 3.5-inch and then sew them together, or I can sew my 4 patches and then square up my 4 patches down to match whatever I want them to do when I put them together with the half square triangles, right, in a particular pattern. Doesn't matter which way I do that, but what I want to prove to you is that the fact that they're ready, that means I have 4 patches, because I see them on top. Looks like I have, oh, actually I didn't sew all of them together. Actually I have some squares as well, so I can actually take the squares and I can trim them down to 3.5-inch, and let's say I can use those half square triangles with these in a churn dash block. Stars blocks as well come to mind, but I have a feeling based on how these are packaged together, I wanted to make another one of these lap quilts, and hence I already have the 4 patches. And why trim down these these squares if I already have a pattern in that package over there that I already know I want to do? But hey, who knows, it's still an option, right? Let's see what else I got in here. So I got my reds and greens, I got my blacks and beiges. It looks like one of my quilts must have had more white fabric in it. Again, remember downstairs I said when you have your favorite quilt pattern, you just change up the color scheme and remake it. Makes the quilt look completely different. So it looks like I had a lot of leftover whites, and I've put them together so that I know that whatever I make, these will go together very nicely. Now obviously I can mix the white and the green here and the white and the red with green and red. Certainly got enough of scrappiness here going on that the sky's the limit. Now what I know that I will do, and this is gonna, I promise this is gonna lead to a recommendation based on this quilt is when I put all of these squares together, or in a packaging, so to speak, to make my own kit, I knew that I wanted to put them together to do some free motion quilting. I did the free motion quilting on this quilt. I was actually fortunate enough to do it at my local quilt shop. Many of the ones here in the Houston area actually allow you to rent time on their long arms, and I hope you have the opportunity to do so, and I hope you have the opportunity to do so on different machines, either by model or by manufacturer. Actually, my preference is for you to be able to do it by the difference of manufacturer in particular, so you get to feel the difference in the machines. You think a long arm is a long arm is a long arm, but it actually is a Volvo, a Kia, is a Mercedes, a Honda Accord. Not really, right? So although many of those cars drive well, the driving experience is different, and your experience on a long arm will be different based on you, right? And what your needs or requirements are, or what feels good to you. So I encourage you to do that. That's the second recommendation. The featherweight was the first recommendation. That's the second recommendation, long arm. And even if you don't decide to buy a long arm in the future, if you also decide that it's not for you, so to speak, at least you will understand what your long armor goes through, and you will appreciate the price you are paying them to actually long arm your stuff. It's almost like it's almost like figure skating, right? We watch people do these amazing things. They make it look effortless, and we think, oh yeah, they can do it so easily, and you may think it shouldn't cost you much, right? But a lot of time and effort goes into long arming, whether the person does it on a computerized long arm or they actually do it freehand. And I think that experience will teach you a lot. Anyway, second advice coming from quilt in particular. As you can see from how I stored my 4 patches here, I kept my greens going one way, my reds going one way, my beiges and my blacks, right? Just by the simple nature of the 4 patch itself. And because the fabrics already went well together in the quilts they were in, the theme is the same, i.e. Christmas, the quilt looks beautiful, no matter, without even any real effort. The only thing I think I tried to make sure, because of my dear friend Patrice Clay, I tried to make sure the directional fabric was actually in the right place. So you can actually read Christmas, Merry Christmas here, you can read Home there. Somewhere around here there's probably a reindeer whose hoofs had to be down. I made my girl proud because she doesn't like when stuff is all over the place. So things like that don't really bother me in my quilts, especially in my scrappy quilts. But I will say that's something that I made sure I try to do in this one in particular. The other thing you will notice is from where you're looking at it, even from where I'm looking at it, the inconsistencies in my free motion quilting is hardly noticeable at all. And I'll say that because as all of us start off learning free motion quilting, whether you're doing it on a computerized machine or you're doing it freehand, because even with a computerized machine you have starts and stops sometimes, and there's some learning there, and there's some things that can happen along the way where you'll notice some imperfections, right? It might be more to the fact that you didn't size your quilt motif versus the block correctly, things like that, right? I promise you, I truly did not like this quilt when I finished it, because when you're working on it, you're right on top of it and you see all your imperfections. But after I brought it home, sat it in my living room, got chilly one night. This one has Minky on the back, so of course I reached for it. It got to loving on me. I got to loving on it. All those imperfections all of a sudden didn't matter. And this wonderful learning experience that I had actually taught me another lesson. Quilt doesn't have to be perfect to be appreciated. It doesn't have to be perfect to be loved. It doesn't have to be perfect to be enjoyed. So wherever you may be in your journey of learning to free motion quilt, whether you're doing it by machine on like a long arm, maybe you're doing it on a mid arm, maybe you're actually doing hand quilting. Wherever you may be at in your process, just do the best that you can and use some of the techniques that we know that help to I'd say hide imperfections a little bit. Certainly with all the busyness in all of these prints, the imperfections are actually well hidden on the front of this quilt. Obviously I used thread that was very matching, so it blends in quite nicely. Also the weight of thread will affect how much the imperfections pop up and are visible to our naked eye. Now, even on the back with the Minky here, Minky, the thread sinks in quite easily. So the imperfections aren't actually seen very well in the Minky either on the back. That's not why I picked it on the back. Actually, I picked Minky on the back because I was doubling down on scrappiness. This Minky is left over from other quilts I finished. So when I tell you that this was a completely free quilt because all the front was scraps, all the back was scraps, I tell you, it was a free quilt. And because I make my own little personal kits out of my scraps, that means I have projects. I have an endless number of projects I can always work on. I can either use them to test colorway layouts, which this also did because I tested black, green, red, and beige. On other versions of the quilt, I've done white, as I mentioned earlier as well, and how much of one versus the other I use. So color placement was one thing I learned on this. Long arming was the other, and also for me, I love cotton batting on most of my quilts, but when I put cotton batting as a test on my quilts with a Minky backing, that may be a little too hot for me. So I tested the warmth and the breathability of the quilt with the Minky background. Turns out that for me personally, batting low loft polyester as the batting on my Minky quilts is highly sufficient for me, and I think for most of the places where my quilts are being sold or enjoyed, that is absolutely perfect, right? Because remember, Minky doesn't breathe as easily as say a regular cotton back, so I take things like that in consideration in the construction of my quilts. So I hope you are excited about making a scrap quilt of some sort from your personalized scrap kits that you put together. Again, if you watched some of my other videos, and they definitely will be linked to the end of this video, you will have heard me say that by keeping everything organized, you're ready to sew at any given time. You also can gift these away if you don't think you're ever going to get to it, or they accumulate a little too much like they do in my world, so to speak. Also, they keep your sewing studio neater. So I can stop right there, and I think I've given you everything you wanted to hear in this video. But I have three bonus things to mention to you before I really end this video. Hopefully you have decided to stick around just a little bit longer. So let me get rid of this as well. I'll pick all that up off the floor later. In my string video, and the link for it will be up above, I mentioned how to package your strings similar to how the half square triangles there were packaged in the 4-patch were, right? Still love that method. That means I'm also ready to pick up any of those and use them on retreat. Usually when I go on retreat, the very first day there, I just sit and do mindless sewing. And I mean just zzz, 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 right? And I just get something done, so I have a feeling of accomplishment on the very first day. I decompress, and then on the second and third day, usually I go on 3 to 4 day retreats, I use the full whole days to concentrate on projects that need my full attention and the maximum amount of hours, right, to work on them, because obviously I didn't get to them at home, right? Now, with string quilts though, when I'm home, I like to take a simple tray like this one. This is a dollar store tray. There's a lot of goodies in the dollar stores, Dollar Tree, Dollar General, whatever dollar stores near you. The reason why I like the tray is because I can put my strips at different sizes, even the little bitty ones for the end of a string quilt block. In the tray, it's nice and flat instead of having a full bag of strings that then I have to sort through before I even start sewing. Again, remember I said it, the more you can streamline all of the steps that get you to actually sewing, the better you'll feel and the more ready you will be to sew as soon as you come into your sewing studio, right? And actually, mindless sewing like string quilting is some of the sewing that I use to decompress and relax. There's a link to that string video up above. Hope you enjoy it. So that was bonus number 1. I gave you 2 pieces of advice and a bonus number 1, right? The other thing I like to do, hold on, let me put this back here, because apparently this is a inspirational pattern for that set, is to take containers like this. Again, you've already seen me mention I like containers that are clear, plastic, and sealable, right? So this acrylic cosmetic tray, easily bought on Amazon.com for about $9. I may have to hunt for the $9 one a little bit, so I may have to put that link in the description block for you. But if memory serves me right, this one was about $9 or $8. And guess what? My straps fit in here perfectly. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I can stack 3 here, and let me see, I got 2 trays, so that's 6 stacks that's in here. The reason why I like this is in my sewing area, I believe a lot of the beauty that we can create is actually in the organization of our fabrics. You'll see in future videos in my studio, can't take you in here today because it's not cleaned enough, of course. My fabrics are stacked neatly by color. They're also stacked neatly by theme. All my modern fabrics are together. All my oriental fabrics are together. All my children's fabrics are together. So all my solids are together. So I can visually see when I look around my sewing studio and go and you pick exactly what I need for a particular project. I can pick the color, I can pick the type of fabric, I can pick low volume versus medium and high volume too, because sometimes I do actually stack mine neat enough in that way. It just brings me joy to do so. That might be a little bit too much for you, but hey, it's just a suggestion. Things like this also add to decorating my space, right? And then also the pieces that are in here, I know I use them. Now, I have to thank Laura of So Very Easy for Canadian. I hope y'all know her. I'll put a link to her video down below. Her grandmother never met a scrap she didn't like. When I found her video, I was like, oh, that's perfect for me, because a 2-inch width scrap, and this is 2 inch by 3.5, that can be thrown into a scrappy quilt is absolutely perfect. The reason why it's perfect to me is anything wider than 2.5, I'm going to cut down so that it goes into quilt patterns that are out there. Many quilt patterns use 2.5 squares, right? They're called mini charms. Also, a 2.5 inch strip is a jelly roll strip. So there's tons of jelly roll patterns out there, right? So I already know what I'm going to do with anything bigger than this. What I would like to stress to you in these scrap videos is that, and let's just say this size is the size that I feel as though I will still want to use up. Does that make sense? Your minimal size might be 2.5 inch, might be 3 inch, right? Figure out what works for you. But I have figured out how to use a smaller width scrap in a beautiful way. There's about 5 or 6 patterns that I have found that use this size width rectangle. Hence, I was like, let me make this daggone ruler for it, because I know I'll use it. And yes, this ruler will be on sale on tenderlystitch.com in the new year, because as you can see, you cut the sides perfectly from it, right? So I know I'm going to use this over and over again. So as I'm doing different projects in my sewing studio and I have something that's about width that can be cut down, I know that I'll use it. I know I have a place for it, and voila, my sewing studio stays neat. Now, if something is truly narrower than this, then I know it's going in my string quilt, right? It'll be in here. So as I'm going through my quilt projects, I'm always keeping my scraps neat, and I'm never creating a mound of scraps that have to be organized. I just personally find that I never have time to do that. I'll never get around to it. And right now I can promise you I have in my garage tubs of scraps that some other folks did not get to, but they've donated. I don't know why they've been donated to me, but anyway. So I don't want to even create that mess. I don't want to even create that headache. It's kind of like, while you're cooking, right? Most of us have been taught to wash dishes while you're cooking, so you don't have so many dishes at the end to clean up after you eat your meal. Same concept. I might as well keep things as organized as possible while I'm doing my projects so that my space remains neat. And again, the neater my space is, the more pleasant it looks when I walk into it, the more likely I'm going to sit down, get right to sewing, and enjoy my projects, right? Working on my projects. So that's all I really want to stress to you. So I guess that's the end of the video almost, except for I got bonus number 3 coming up, which will require me to get up from this chair. So hold on, here comes bonus number 3. Wow, you are still here with me, and I'm so glad that you are. You are ready for bonus number 3. Well, bonus number 3 still is connected to everything else I said, because it has to deal with clear tubes that you may have access to. This is a clear tube from tennis balls. I play tennis. I have friends that play tennis, so I get a lot of these over time. You may get something else over time that's quite easily for you to access that makes sense to you. So that's the learning. I figured out that 2.5-inch squares fits in here, and what I do is sometimes I put all lights in one, all whites or neutrals, blues, greens, whatever, and that way I have a stack of 2.5-inch. I have a stack of 2.5-inch square triangles that are ready to be used in a pattern. Now you might be thinking, but gosh, does it always have to be a scrappy pattern? No. If I'm going through this and a particular fabric I'm about to stitch with doesn't go with the theme of the fabric I'm using in a pattern, I just toss it aside. So for example, if I'm making a quilt that has a lot of modern fabrics in it and I'm going through a container like this and I'm using the 2.5-inch squares from it, then I come across something that's more Civil War-ish, then obviously I'm not going to put that in there, right? So hopefully that makes sense to you. Just use things appropriately. But for the intent purposes of this video, which you've been listening to so intently, it's more about how to just keep things organized in a way in which makes sense so that you're ready to use things. Once you go to use them, you just make sure that you use them appropriately for the pattern that you're working on. So that's all I have. I've got to save some things for the next video series. Now, if you want to see more about how I've organized scraps in general, there'll be some links at the end of this video. Certainly leave comments down below so I can understand what you enjoyed about the content, what you might want to see more of, what questions you have, because we're all still learning together. So many things always constantly change with quilting as with other crafts, and we're always learning how to do things more efficiently and quickly because most of us are pressed for time. But certainly this textile art form has been around for centuries, and it has existed on literally every continent on this earth. And people have always found a way to express themselves through textiles. So our generation, our time period will be no different than the other. And I hope, if nothing else, when you watch some of the videos that I share in this channel, that you are inspired to continue the art form. Because believe it or not, you probably have a connection to it within your bloodline. Somewhere down the road, someone probably made quilts. Whether they were just purely functional or they were decorative. Someone probably did. And if nothing else, somebody definitely used them. Anyway, let me finish because I've got some sewing to get to. Y'all have a blessed day.